Welcome to Deprogram. I'm Michelle Whitty. I am here with Ted Rall, and we are joined by Tina Landis. Tina's a writer for Liberation News and a social justice and environmental organizer. She's the author of Climate Solutions Beyond Capitalism. And we wanted to talk, of course, about these really devastating fires in the Los Angeles area. Over the course of a week, half a dozen fires have broken out in the LA area. As of today, from what I could see, at least two of the major fires are almost entirely uncontained. It is the worst fire disaster LA's ever experienced. This morning's figures were of at least 10 people killed, 10,000 structures destroyed, and more than 350,000 people displaced. The fires are being fed and spread by powerful Santa Ana winds. And so it feels like, Tina, on one hand, we have a nasty combination of natural factors. And in these natural factors, some are like constant and pre-existing, and some are, or all are, exacerbated by climate change, right? So right now we have, on the natural side, a drought and these warm winds that dry out vegetation and spread embers and have been really strong this year. I think they're like 90-mile-an-hour gusts. And on the other hand, we have a combination of human choices in the form of budget cuts, water allocation choices, and an insurance industry that it feels like are coming together to create a situation that was, always occasionally going to be dangerous, right? But to create a situation that is now an absolute disaster. And I wanted to start by just saying, like, how did we get here, right? Because fires are not a new phenomenon. Fires in LA are not a new phenomenon. But I think you can make the case that we have kind of, we being American people, the American society, the government of California, LA, has created the conditions for this to be worse than it needed to be.
Absolutely. Under capitalism, there's really no protections for people. There's no planning. Any planning is about profits, right? I mean, one of the major problems with these fires is there's been this massive development into these wildland urban interface areas. I mean, the Eaton fire, which is by Pasadena, and the Palisades fire, both like right in what's called the WUI, that's the acronym. And it's encouraged not to build structures in these areas because it's very hard for firefighters to, deal with the vegetation, and then, the embers quickly spread to these populated areas. And buildings are very flammable, usually, unless you build them for fire resilience. It's really hard to then contain these in these highly densely populated areas. So that's part of it. Developers are just allowed to build in these areas. And yes, all the budget cuts, 17.6 million was cut from the LA Fire Department budget this year. And CAL FIRE, the statewide firefighting under the Forest Service umbrella, that's always underfunded, always understaffed, always just struggling to keep on top of things. And when you have, like you said, these high winds, very dry conditions, I mean, this is really unprecedented to have fires in January to this extent, I mean, it's really absolutely from climate change.
Yeah, traditionally the Santa Ana winds were a summer phenomenon, right? Is that not correct?
Traditionally, it would be, I work in air quality management, and we deal with wildfire smoke impacts on populations. And, even when I started the job 13 years ago, it was June through, October were the times you really had to worry about it. Now it is literally all year round, just in those, that last decade. So it's a real crisis, and there's really no preparation for communities. ahead of time.
Hmm.
There's a little bit, if you can afford to do vegetation management around your home, you can do that. CAL FIRE does it in the public lands areas, but it's really up to homeowners to deal with their own vegetation and prepare. And then you have the insurance companies, right? State Farm in March canceled 30,000 homeowner policies in California. 1,600 of those are in Pacific Palisades.
Hmm.
So these folks have no insurance, no way to rebuild. I mean, unless they're wealthy. There are some
Hmm.
wealthy people in those areas, but the majority of people aren't going to be able to afford to rebuild, right? And
Hmm.
they may have lost their jobs too. I mean, these are huge areas, huge urban areas that are decimated, gone, like
Hmm.
off. If you look at the aerial photographs, it's just devastating. So people have no income now. They have no home. They have
Yeah.
no belongings, and there's not going to be much relief from the government. I mean, that's the reality under capitalism, right?
I want to ask, yeah, I want to come back to rebuilding and insurance and like what this does to the sort of trajectory of American society. But I do want to come back because, like, I there are, of course, you and Ted just talked about the Santa Ana winds coming at an unusual time. We've talked about this drought that's exacerbated by climate change, but I get frustrated sometimes when big institutions or governments kind of write off disasters like this as, oh, well, climate change, and what we're doing about this is like banning drilling in places of the country that nobody wanted to drill anyway, right? And so I wanted to get back to like, okay, yeah, we are living in a reality of a changing climate and of drought and whatever else, but that doesn't mean there's nothing that can be done on a state level or a municipal level to make this less disastrous for people. And so, like, what I want to give us that picture a little bit, because that is what frustrates me so much. The state of California, which is one of the biggest economies of the world, can't fund a state firefighting program when you know fires are going to happen. What is going on there?
Right. I mean, that's the nature of capitalism, right? I mean, as little as possible is put into services and infrastructure for the public because it's not profitable, right? They don't
Hmm.
see that as, a good investment, right? So they put in as much as they have to, but it's constantly being whittled away. I mean, nationally, $1.5 trillion goes to the war budget, directly or indirectly. It's like there's no care for the residents of this country. Like we all know, everyone knows, despite what politicians may or may not say, climate change is happening. You cannot deny it. I mean, it should be seen as a war effort,
Hmm.
put all our resources into protecting communities, preparing for these things. There needs to be wildfire fuel reduction happening way more. I mean, CAL FIRE is trying to do it, but it's just they're so understaffed.
Hmm.
And fire suppression was the motto of the country since the late 1800s in the West. And so all that fuel has built up over a century, and now they're trying to play catch up.
Hmm.
So it's climate change on top of like bad fire management policy for
Hmm.
over a century. Um, there is so much that could be done. I mean, the US needs to stop using fossil fuels. I mean, we are the richest country, one of the
Hmm.
richest countries in the world. California is the fifth largest economy. We should be immediately shifting to renewables, but private utilities stand in the way. Like out here in California, PG&E is
Hmm.
slowing down that process by making it not affordable to actually install solar on your home.
Hmm.
Um, there's just so many things that could happen under like a socialist planned economy where there's actually like thought put into where resources are going that benefit people instead
Hmm.
of just benefiting a handful of the super rich.
Hmm.
Um, land management practices, like I said, where you're building, where you're developing, agriculture takes in California and in the West in general, takes 80% of our freshwater resources.
Hmm.
This industrial agricultural model that is just so wasteful and so detrimental to the ecosystem and adds to climate changing, adds to global warming, through all, this sort of decimation of land. So there's so much that could be done. The CAL FIRE also is struggling to reforest all these areas that have been burned, these huge, huge areas. That would help to add, trees create rainfall, actually.
Hmm.
So it would actually help rebalance the water cycle. But they're struggling, like I said, because they have no budget.
Mm.
There's a lot that can be done, but there's no plan, and it's all disorganized because it's each municipality decides what they're going to do, and some statewide funding comes, but it's really, if you don't have a lot of income in your community, you don't get a lot of services.
Yeah.
So it's just, yeah, it's super disorganized. Capitalism doesn't work. Climate change is really bringing that to be really more apparent,
Mm.
acute. But there is so much that could be done.
Ted, I know you have a question. I'm just going to say it's interesting because we watched at the level of the UN, countries that are most affected by climate change, poor countries struggle and try to get the sort of contributors to give to a fund that they can then use. But it's like it's sort of being set up as, oh, this is like a big bureaucratic problem. Well, no, you have California, which again is like a globally ranked economy, which theoretically is from, oh, we know what to do. Like we're innovators, blah, blah, blah. And California can't even manage it at a state level. Won't manage it at a state level. It sort of goes to show that all these arguments about how other countries are inefficient or this process is inefficient is just bullshit. It's just desire. It's political will and desire. Sorry, go ahead, Ted. I just wanted to slide that in.
Yeah, well, I mean, I completely take your point, by the way, about sort of the absence of centralized planning in a capitalist society, and that being a huge problem, both for mitigating climate change that's already underway and irreversible, and possibly trying to maybe not reverse but slow down additional climate change that's in the cards for us. But I mean, in this system, right? I mean, there is no such thing as even statewide planning for anything, right? So we could never, for example, a municipality, Los Angeles could theoretically, for example, say, we don't want it, we're not going to allow, we're not going to authorize new building on the sites of homes that have already been destroyed. Or if we do, they can't get insurance, that's on you and you don't get any help. There's things but like the state of California, for example, there's no office in Sacramento that can say, well, actually, no one should live in Malibu ever again, or whatever. I mean, if that's the decision that needs to happen. So we're talking about within the construct of the American capitalist system, we're talking really about a federalism issue, right? Like about the way that this country has been constructed from the ground up, that we don't have a centralized education system like almost every other country has, or a centralized healthcare system, which is why you don't know if some people come back from Asia in the fall of 2019 feeling a little weird and they don't know why, and nobody is able to put all the cards together, figure it all out at the CDC because there's no one controlling thing. I mean, I don't think that's reformable, right, within the existing system.
Yeah, I mean, not the direction we're going in. I mean, we're so far from, having any public control over anything in this country. Everything's been whittled away over decades. I mean, that's what, I'm a member of a socialist party, Party for Socialism and Liberation, and we see that the people's movement is what's really going to bring change. I mean, if there's enough of us in motion demanding action, demanding a new system, really, we can make it happen.
Why is that not
happening? We really
are
the majority.
Why is that not happening, though? It's not happening, right? There is no major, no offense, but there's no major left of the Democratic Party political organization in the United States. There hasn't really been one, I would say, since the 80s, 70s, certainly since the 70s, really. Why in the last election is climate change, in my view, it's the existential question of our age. It's like nothing else matters if the planet goes under, because nothing matters.
There's nothing else.
Social equity, nothing matters, right? Yeah. So why, the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris's campaign and Biden's before hers, Democrats have not taken this issue for their own. And what's curious to me is that no Republicans have taken it for their own either, because there's a lot of money to be made from redoing the entire economy. When you trash an old sector, you get rid of, horses and buggies, you create a new thing called cars. There's a lot of money to be made. How come there's no capitalist imperative to work on this?
Yeah, I mean, once you build the renewable energy infrastructure, though, solar and wind, other than replacing those panels and wind turbines occasionally every couple decades, there's not a lot of money to be made, honestly, compared to fossil fuels that you're constantly, it's constantly subsidized by the government and you're selling a product and it's, you need it to run the whole
But then
society,
there's the
right?
new and
It's a
improved
little,
solar panel that's more efficient than the old one that we sold you
right.
But
before.
then we're back in the same
Right.
pot.
Yeah.
There are opportunities, but yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. And the left in the US has really been decimated, over time. I mean, the unions were crushed under Reagan. It's been a slow, you know, dividing the working class across, race and gender and all these things over time. And there's really not a lot of unity across the working class at the moment. Um, but I do see hope. I mean, like the reaction of people to the genocide in Gaza has brought a whole new layer of millions of people in this country to the awareness of, wow, the US is an imperialist country and it actually doesn't care about human rights despite what it says. So I'm using that as an example because consciousness can change very rapidly.
Sure.
And millions of people could see through
Nothing happens
the
until
lies.
suddenly it does, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, the media plays a big role in this too, because I mean, we're just constantly bombarded with the doom and gloom scenario of climate change, but no solutions are ever put forward. Like so it's really a lack of education, which what I tried to do with the book I wrote is to really show that there are solutions. There are
Yeah.
so many things that we could be doing and that are happening around the globe, but just not on a mass comprehensive scale in most places.
But the original sin of Southern California, since that's what we're talking about, is that really nobody should be living there. I mean, the population should be about 100th of what it is today. It should look like Central Nevada because it has the same amount of water as Central Nevada. And yet there's this whole Colorado River catastrophe. No one's focused on it. It's like people keep moving there. Scottsdale, Arizona is the fastest growing metro area in the United States. What is wrong with us?
Yeah, because they're just looking at the next budget cycle. They're not looking at there's no long-term planning. That is the problem. It's like, how can we, build these houses and sell them quickly before people figure out like they're not actually going to have water or the water is going to cost so much to pump into their homes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There should not be a massive city like that in the desert where you have to literally divert a river
Yeah.
to feed that city. That is the problem of capitalism, where there's no planning. There's no thought. It's all about.
And no one says no.
short-term.
No one just says no.
Because there's not another option, I mean, people are moving where they can afford to live, and that's there's not another way. I mean,
although the glory of this disaster, if you can say that there's an upside to it, is the fact that it's disproportionately affecting rich people, right? I mean, to be in the LA area, rich people live in the hills. Poor people live in the flatlands. The fires have been in the hills.
Well, I want to ask about that because I just also want to say I've walked along the LA aqueduct. I walked many, many miles along that aqueduct because it's part of the PCT. I wanted to ask about this because we now, unfortunately, we have seen the aftermath of a lot of California fires, and we have seen who recovers and whose lives are the trajectory is permanently altered, right? And so, I wanted to talk about how insurance plays into this, what's going to happen. I mean, I have an idea if what happens is wealthy people with multi-million-dollar homes are, of course, taking a hit, but can get away. They can recover. They're fine. They'll go to their other houses. They will be okay. Whereas, a bunch of middle-class people who maybe just lost their homeowner's insurance or now they lost their insurance and they've lost their home, so they've lost everything. Or now they are among the growing ranks of people who can't have their homes insured, which basically makes this great asset valueless. That to me just exacerbates economic inequality, right? So like it in the long term, maybe it's going to be helpful for the wealthy and powerful to experience what other people are experiencing, I guess, you know what I mean? And in the sense that they'll see that it's real, but in the short term, it seems like it just pushes us toward more inequality. And we've also seen recently that this country apparently has not hit its tolerance level for homelessness, which increased by nearly 20% last year. So I fear in the short term, what this is going to be is a personal tragedy and inconvenience for the wealthy, but just the end of life as they know it for anybody who's not. I wanted to ask you about
And
that.
there's going to be a lot more fires.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, even people who do have coverage, we saw what happened in the hurricanes in the East Coast, in the Southeast, earlier in the year. And, even people who did have insurance, they just refused to cover anything, or they gave such a minuscule amount in recovery that it wasn't even, there's still no way to rebuild your home.
Mhm.
Do you
So
think they're going
yes,
to do
the
that with
wealthy.
fires? I mean, typically, sorry to interrupt, but like with hurricane, remember in Hurricane Katrina when there was all that bullshit about like, oh, your house was washed away by a flood. You were insured for wind. Do they do? Is there something similar
Ooh.
with fires?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think if you have fire insurance, yeah, but I'm sure there's so many loopholes, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just, yeah, they can just say, yeah, they'll find
Mhm.
some little loophole and deny you,
Yeah.
even if they say they're covering fire. So yeah, I mean, the insurance companies private insurance should be abolished. I mean, they're completely parasites. They give no service to people, especially with the increasing extreme weather.
Mhm.
But yeah, like you said, the Hollywood people who lost their homes, they'll be fine. But there are people, yeah, like you said, middle class families that now are destitute. Now they're driven into poverty. And that's really every climate disaster, more and more people are driven into poverty. I mean, there's
Mhm.
there's going to be 10,000 structures, over 10,000 structures burned. A lot of those are homes. I mean, that's
Mhm.
mass displacement of huge numbers of people in the
Mhm.
LA area. Where are they going to go? How are they going to restart? Like I said, they might have also lost their job. The place they worked at might have burned down.
Mhm.
So it has massive repercussions throughout society. And like you said, homelessness is already on the rise with inflation, with healthcare debt, with all these things that, under capitalism, it's like we're constantly squeezed more and more. And climate change is just another one of those things that just pushing people out, pushing people into, you know, displacement, literally, and homelessness.
Mhm.
Can I
So
ask
we'll see
about
how it
something
plays out.
that's
But really, what's going to be the determining factor is us, is the people organized.
Yeah.
yeah.
How are we going to react? Are we going to organize? Are we going to fight back, or are we just going to like take it? We really need to keep organizing and really build with unions and get sort of mass workers movements together to push back on this, because otherwise the capitalists will keep taking. That's
Mhm.
their job.
Could we also, I was just wondering if you could say something a little bit about an issue that's kind of like just sort of barely mentioned related to these fires, which is the effect on people's lungs, right? I mean, we here in New York, we had air quality indices of over 400 during the big Canadian wildfires a couple of years ago, where the sky looked like Blade Runner 2047,
Mhm.
orange, bright orange. I have asthma. I suffer from respiratory issues, and basically, when you smell that crap, you know that it's like smoking like 50 packs of cigarettes, right?
Mhm.
You just no, we're just not focused on that, are we? I mean, these people in Los Angeles who still have their homes, but a lot of them they're going to get lung cancer years from now because of this.
Yeah, I mean, in California, we're a little more used to it than the East Coast, but still, it has major health impacts. It can have immediate health impacts. If you have lung or heart conditions, it can trigger heart attacks, it can trigger stroke, and long-term lung impacts. And like you said, if you have asthma or other respiratory issues, it's really dangerous. And it's more dangerous for children and the elderly and all these
Mm-hmm.
things. And yeah, around LA for the past few days has been, the unhealthy. It's like 170 something on the air quality index scale. Very unhealthy to be out in that. I mean, a lot of folks who are wealthier or, have dealt with this before do have air purifiers in their homes. Some buildings have air purifiers. So when you're indoors, you're at least not breathing it. But yeah, the working class people who are working landscaping, who do construction, who do
Mhm.
road work. I mean, anyone who has agricultural workers, they have to be out in this breathing it all day, right?
Mhm.
There's really no protections for them.
Mhm.
I mean, other than schools closing, I think everything's operating as normal if
Mm-hmm.
you're not in an evacuation zone. So people are out there. Yes, does absolutely have health impacts,
Mhm.
very dangerous ones. And it's not just like you think like, oh, it's just a forest fire or a brush fire. So it's just vegetation burning. It's like putting wood in my fireplace. No, these are buildings burning, cars burning. There's
Yeah.
so many toxins in that
Mm-hmm.
smoke no one even really knows exactly what's in it, you know. So it's very dangerous to breathe that in. And people, yeah, I'm not in LA, I'm in San Francisco, so
Mhm.
I'm not hearing the public health messaging, but I'm sure there is some, but not, you know, not enough for people to really understand what's how dangerous it really is.
Mhm. I'm surprised that there isn't more. You know, I was just thinking, like, I hope somebody is tracking um, homelessness with regard to natural disaster, right? Like, give it a space of a year, and then if you're still living in a hotel because your home was destroyed and you haven't been moved in, like, are you counted among the homeless? And how is this going to rise over the next few years? And you know, we've talked in the past on the show and in other conditions with our other host John Kiriakou, who sort of rose very high in the ranks of government and also spent time in prison. And we talked about how I think most Americans don't really, if you don't have a personal connection to the prison system, you don't really understand what it is and how bad it is. And I do feel like we probably need a lot more frequent and robust reporting on just what it is like to try to rebuild after a natural disaster, because there are going to be more and more people affected by this. It's going to be a cause of homelessness. Like, it's going to be a cause of economic precarity. And I think it's one of these things that you don't understand until you are trying to deal with the SBA, you know, the Small Business Administration and FEMA and your state and local government, how like you can go from being a comfortable middle class person to potentially on the street if you don't have a family behind you or generational wealth behind you.
After local news reports after any disaster, that afternoon they'll say, and now the rebuilding begins.
You're right.
Like, not now.
Yeah.
Not now.
Yeah.
It's going to be maybe never. It's going to be a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's still parts of New Orleans that haven't been rebuilt since Katrina. I mean, it's like
I was just there. I saw it.
yeah, I mean, it's yeah, if you don't have the money, it's not going to happen. And you know, if you're a renter and your landlord doesn't want to rebuild and you can't find it, you know, I mean, California, it's very hard to find affordable housing as a renter or a homeowner. I mean, yeah, you're really in dire situation. And there's just no protections for people. There's no relief for people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I always use the comparison of Cuba, which is very economically strapped due to the 60 plus year US blockade against them. But you know, after a hurricane, they have the lowest death rate of any country from hurricanes, even though they get directly hit, because there's actually a preparedness program. Everyone knows where to go, everyone knows what to do, and no one's left homeless afterwards. Mm-hmm. Your house is rebuilt, you're given another house, like the government takes care of you. It's like completely opposite of here.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, tough luck, you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And
I remember being very impressed with Hugo Chavez in Venezuela when there were floods, and he opened up all the government buildings, including his residence, to let people who were victims stay there.
It comes back to like, you know, I do think, as you say, Tina, climate change is reported as, it's one, nothing but doom and gloom, and two, it's become an absolute excuse for corporate rapaciousness and willful incompetence, right? Because as you say, with the example of Cuba, like, this is clearly not about money. This is clearly not about funding. California's got plenty of that. It's clearly not about great American ingenuity. You know what I mean? Like, it is a choice. And also there are people who could be making the right decisions. You know what I mean? We just don't have a media that finds those voices and amplifies them. And we have a government that, you know, consistently excludes them because they don't serve corporate interests in the extremely short term.
Right. I mean, just the example of PG&E here in this state. I mean, what they've gotten away with, and I mean, literally killed over 100 people through sparking wildfires throughout the state because of their faulty transmission lines and energy infrastructure. And the state just keeps bailing them out and passes on all the costs to ratepayers. Our rates have doubled in California since 2019. Like, it's astronomical, like what people have to pay now for electricity and gas. Yeah. And you know, the state facilitates this. The government facilitates this, like stealing the wealth of the working class and putting it into the hands of these corporations who are actually criminal and killing people.
If a corporation is a corporation is a person, I've said this for a long time. Yeah. It should be punishable like a person. You should be able to put it in the equivalent of prison. You should be able to fine it. I mean, if you or I commit some kind of, business fraud. Like we cheat on our taxes, go to prison
Or
for
if
20
we go
years.
personally set a fire,
Yeah.
Right,
or set a
right.
fire through our own negligence,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We will pay. We will lose all our money. All our bank accounts will be cleared out. I mean, and the answer for a corporation like PG&E is it should be nationalized.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big
Yeah.
push for that. And there's actually legislation that said if they don't fulfill what they're supposed to be doing, they become a public nonprofit entity. But of course the government doesn't actually want that legislation to be implemented, but
Yeah, we'll
people are
see.
pushing for it. There's a lot of anger here about it.
Well, lend on that, on people pushing for something that will benefit them.
Yeah.
Tina, thank you so much. And also tell our listeners where they can find Climate Solutions Beyond Capitalism and the rest of your work.
Yeah, so the book is available on 1804 Books, that's the publisher. And you can find my regular writing on liberationnews.org.
Okay. Thanks so much, Tina. Really appreciate it. Great to
Thanks,
see you.
Tina.
Yeah, thank you.